So, welcome officially to the Valentine's Day edition of Wireside Chat. And my co host is Melissa Hart. Melissa, I realized that we should call this podcast the podcast of wit and heart.
Oh, oh, that's beautiful.
And I am Paul Wickover, the dean of the MFA program. So welcome, Carrie. Um, I guess we'll just jump right in. I mean, we're still kind of hoping that our guest may be having technical difficulties. Um, so we're hoping that she will continue to join us or will join us at all. And our guest is Kate Ballinger, who's a romance writer and an adjunct instructor in our program, wonderful writer who knows a lot about the genre. That's her primary genre. She writes romances that have a paranormal element. Um, so I guess we can just talk a little bit about romance. Now, romance is not my genre. I'm a speculative fiction writer, but among my many jobs that I've had in the past, because I worked as a freelance writer for many years, freelance writer, freelance editor, I worked for Harlequin Romance, and I was a copy editor, freelance copy editor for Harlequin, and I did a lot of romances for them, and they ran the gamut from sort of Jane Austen type romances set in the now I'm blanking on what the name of those kinds of romances are. Set
Regentry?
yeah,
No,
the Regency romances, yes,
Regency.
set during the time of the Regency in England, and those are always a lot of fun, very witty. They depend a lot on the repartee between the two main characters, obviously dealing with social classes uh, and social elements like that that are kind of specific to that time, but maybe have an echo today. I don't know how many of you saw Bridgerton, that Netflix series, but you can see how they were able to take the traditional um, elements of a Regency romance and transform it into something that was a lot more modern by kind of writing what I suppose would be an alternate history, right? An alternate historical approach to romance by postulating a social order that did not really exist at the time. But then I also copy edited a kind of romance that was known as the alpha male romance, which, to kind of quote one of my professors from college, was about when men were men and women liked them that way. Um, and these are romances with, like, big strapping strong guys who kind of uh, are the types who, like, when they go out to order at a restaurant, they order for their lady friend. And I personally found these romances to be very offensive, and at times, in fact, I had to turn down some copy editing jobs because I felt they crossed the line. But nonetheless, they're extremely popular, and they're still popular today. I mean, this wasn't that long ago. But doing all of this gave me a kind of respect for the romance genre and for the variety of the romance genre that I hadn't had previous to that. I mean, I admit, it's like kind of ironic because so many people look down their noses at fantasy and science fiction. I was sort of the same when it comes to romance, and I learned my lesson, and I found that romance is a wonderful genre that deals with issues that are very much of the moment, and the writing is wonderful. Some At this point, some of my favorite writers are romance writers. One of my all-time favorite writers is Dorothy Dunnett. Have you ever read her, Melissa?
No,
Has anybody read anything by Dorothy Dunnett?
no.
She wrote a series of books called the Lyman Chronicles, which are set in in Scotland in I think in the 1600s or 1700s. Anyway, they are just fantastic. They've got it all. They're romances, they've got adventure, they've got sword fights, they've got mystery, they've got a little bit of the supernatural. Just terrific. Here, I'll put that into the chat. Dorothy Dunnett.
Okay.
You'd think with a name like that, she'd be a mystery writer. But no, she was a romance writer. So that's my introduction, I guess, to the genre of romance. How I learned to appreciate it for something that went far, far beyond my stereotypical understanding of it. So I would be curious to know, Melissa, what your experience of romance has been.
Oh boy, not much. I did try to put a sex scene in a young adult novel, which caused my agent to beg me never to try to write a sex scene again. Um, but romance, I guess, as a contributing editor at the Writer magazine, I do know something about it. I have to follow it because I periodically report on romance writers' conferences and gatherings and novelists and things like that. So I know it's become a great deal more diverse. I know that, and I think we all know that the Romance Writers of America has had historically a diversity problem, and they're trying like hell to fix it, but not fast enough and not well enough to please everybody. So we're starting to see spin-offs of into other organizations, like one I put in the chat here, the Spring Fling Chicago Romance Writers Conference. I don't believe they're affiliated with the Romance Writers of America anymore. I think they divested themselves. And we're seeing a lot of LGBTQIA romances and lots of different publishers open to lots of different types of romance writing now.
Absolutely.
And I'll say that even if you poo-poo the genre, don't, because people gravitate toward romance regardless of genre. And so you want the basic skills and you want to know the basic tropes to be able to write that into your science fiction and fantasy, or your young adult, unless you're me, or your detective fiction, etc. There's crossover there. So I think it behooves us all to know something about it.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, and that's why, in fact, in this program, you take MFA 514, which exposes you to all of the genres that we focus on in the program. One thing that I have learned about romance, and which in part I learned, or at least this was reinforced by our guest in my conversations with our guest, our absent guest, Kate Ballinger. Is that every genre has its expectations. It has its set of tropes. It has its kind of promises that are made by the genre to its readers, and then the writer is expected to either keep those promises, or if they're going to break them, at least break them in an original, creative, entertaining way, a surprising way that gives pleasure to readers. Romance is a little bit different than that. Because the basic expectation of a romance novel is, at least in the context of like what's going to be published, is, I mean, published by a publisher like Harlequin, or any publisher that publishes romance fiction as a category. The expectation is that there's going to be a happy ever after ending, or a happy for now ending. HEA or HFN ending. And I think a lot of people, when they first start writing romance, if it's not something that they've read a lot of, for example, if they're just kind of thinking, like Melissa was suggesting, I'm going to put a romantic subplot into my mystery novel. that's a little bit different because romance as a genre is not romantic per se. A romantic subplot does not have to have a happy ever after. It might. It doesn't have to have a happy for now. But a romance novel that's going to be published as a category romance, at least right now, does have to have those things, or it simply will not be considered by an agent or by a publishing house. And that's why, for example, there's a difference. A lot of times people think, well, why, if I go into a bookstore, why is there this section called called paranormal romance, or a subsection of the romance section called paranormal romance that has like, vampires who are engaged in a very, hot and heavy relationship, whereas you have a completely separate section called horror, which also has vampires. But so what's the difference? Why do you have those two sections? And the answer is just what I said, because the paranormal romance, that puts romance, these are romances with a paranormal element, whereas a horror is going to have another set of tropes that are primary. And that's what the publisher will be interested in. And that's the audience to whom the publisher will be marketing those books. A typical horror reader is not at all interested necessarily in a happy ever after. They don't care. They're not interested in a happy for now ending. They don't necessarily care about that. If it it's not a deal breaker for them if that is not there. But for the romance reader, that is a deal breaker. And like I said, for agents and editors in that field, it is a deal breaker. But that said, I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to learn from the romance genre and weave it into your fiction in a very helpful way. I mean, I wonder how many of our attendees tonight are writing romances or romances that incorporate another element like a paranormal romance, but are still hewing to the romantic, I don't want to say formula exactly, but the expectations of that genre.
I see that Wendy writes romantic suspense. I don't actually know what that is. Wendy, would you be able to describe?
Yeah, so it's technically romance because it focuses on the couple and their building relationship and how that happens, but it works in a lot of action and adventure. So a lot of what I write is dystopian, futuristic type settings, and I throw the couple into the middle of it, and it's based on their relationship, but you follow them through this chaos that their life has become and how they get through it. So you do end up with your happily ever after or your happily for now, depending on if it's a series or not, but it's more suspenseful, more action packed.
Okay.
And I think you hit on something very interesting, which is that you said that the focus of your novels is on the relationship between these characters. And I think that is one thing that distinguishes a romance from other genres. Even though the books you're writing have speculative fiction elements, for example, a speculative fiction novel is going to foreground those elements. They're the most important thing. The plot is going to revolve around those dystopian elements. Relationships will be important, but they won't be the most important thing in the novel. And I think that's one of the signs that you can tell a romance by, I guess.
Right. So I mean, when I pitch as a romance novel, but I do state that is romantic suspense, that it works in the other aspects and it kind of blends the genres together. But ideally, it does come down to it is a romance.
And what about anybody else? Is anybody else also writing romance? Oh, look, we have a little
That's awesome.
a little green dinosaur with
my
us.
Grandchild.
Oh.
Yes, and he
So
was making
cute.
too much noise, so I had to pick him up.
Paula, it looks like both Carrie and Megan write paranormal romance. And again, not my genre. I want to know more about this.
So yes, if somebody would like to tell us about the paranormal romance,
Oh, no.
Sarah, why don't you go
No,
ahead?
I'm not writing a paranormal romance.
That's okay. Tell us about what you're writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of working on, so I have a background in psychology, and I wanted to incorporate like emotional trauma in a character and overcoming emotional trauma and going through the steps of that, but also having it be a romance. So the love interest is like the teacher, kind of like Jane Austen,
Mm-hmm.
where the love interest kind of guides her along and strengthens her and returns it back to where she was. Because I'm basically writing about someone who was an Olympian horseback rider, and then something, I don't want to like say too much, but something happens with like an ex lover, and she's distraught, and then it kind of wrecks her horse riding career. So she's kind of building herself up. And this is where it kind of gets into like where she's a damsel in distress in a way, I guess, because she's mentally in a bad place, but he's like helping her along. So that's kind of where that's the basically you're like blah, how I can sum it up.
Yep.
So yeah.
He's kind of the knight in shining armor trope,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
And what about you, Kara?
So I write paranormal romance, heavy on the paranormal, which is basically anything with. So it's. I think of them as more speculative fiction with sex scenes.
Okay.
Basically, I mean, it is still a little bit of a romance in there, but it's anything paranormal. My current novel that I'm working on, the main character is from a pagan background. Her family is pagan, and she has the gift of seeing through the veil to people who have not, their spirits are there. They haven't moved on to heaven or hell or whichever, however you want to say it. So she deals with them, and she's helping a detective solve a murder. What do you want to call it? A serial pedophile is the word I'm looking for. And it's actually set in my town that I live in. So I have very descriptive, like people reading it, they're like, oh, is that this restaurant? Yep, that's that restaurant. That kind of thing. So paranormal romance is anything. It can have vampires in it. It can have werewolves in it. It can have ghosts in it. Anything speculative fiction with those type of paranormal elements in a romance. One of my favorite authors is Karen Marie Moning, and her books are marketed as romance books, but I don't see them that way. I really don't. I think they're more speculative fiction because she deals with the world of the fae and shapeshifters and things. And yes, there is a romance, but there isn't an HEA or an HFN in the first several books until you get to the end of the series.
Right.
So
that reminds me of like another job I used to have was writing cover copy for books, and I wrote a lot of cover copy over the years, including for the novels of Laurel K. Hamilton. And I think she's kind of an important figure in the bringing of eroticism into romance in a very kind of positive way, right? It's seen as a positive quality in the characters, and I guess Anne Rice was one of the writers who kind of paved the way, and then Laurel Hamilton sort of picked up the torch and carried it farther. I think she's an excellent writer. Both of them, obviously, excellent writers, but I really enjoyed Laurel K. Hamilton's work. It's a nice perk when you're in a freelance job where you have to work on stuff that you actually like. Doesn't happen all the time. But I do want to touch on something that you mentioned, Kara, which is, and you mentioned it too, Melissa, actually, what is what is the relationship, I mean, in genre terms, between sex and romance? I mean, does a romance require sex scenes? Obviously, Regency romances don't really have sex scenes as such, although there's always a kind of a powerful attraction, physical attraction that's evident. I mean, but I'd just be curious to hear what people think about, like, how does sex and romance go together?
In my opinion, with the popularity of 50 Shades of Grey, which we won't go into too much detail about that book series and my thoughts on that, but the other term for it is mommy porn, made it so, that's the term for it, made that type of novel so popular that now people kind of, oh, that was a good burp, sorry. That made
He's a literary critic already.
yeah, made that type of novel really, really popular. So people a lot of times expect it in their romance novels to go, if it's set in modern times, they a lot of times expect it. If it's an adult novel, if it's a young adult, new adult, emerging adult, not so much.
Mhm.
But if it's, you know, the main character's over the age of, say, 23, 24, the people that I talk to expect it.
But
So
there's also varying degrees as to how it's included,
Yes.
and it's definitely author preference. I think there's definitely ways to write a romance novel having sex in it, but not having those detailed,
right.
you know, graphic scenes where you get into your 50 Shades of Grey.
Yes.
But I think you could certainly have a great romance with a sex scene that's not detailed and still have it be a great story.
Or you could, my experience is you could even have those 50 Shades of Grey scenes, but not as descriptive.
Right,
You know,
right.
not using the same terms and being just, you know, really putting it out there. Just kind of having like a little bit of a veil over it. So it's more suggestive and things like that. So, but one
Sarah,
of
I think
funniest
Sarah's
things-
going to say something.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh yeah. Well, for class, I just read The Hating Game, which is a romance, like hate to love. And I kind of feel like my biggest critique with that story is that the couple gets together like midway through the book.
Mm.
So it kind of happened like really fast.
Like too soon?
Yeah, like too soon. And then there were a lot of sex scenes, and then it's kind of like it was being drawn out too much. It kind of got boring a little bit, because it was like, okay, like we're together now it's kind of overdone. Like, so I don't know what the balance is with that. Like,
Was there other
That's
conflict?
exactly it. I think there has to be a balance. I think you have to find the way to work it into the story so that it still flows. You still have a good path and where you're getting to in the end, but without making your reader feel like, oh God, already, or this again, you know, and that's where it comes down to. I mean, it also depends on what the book is about. I read a couple books for a couple classes by Helen Hong, The Kiss Quotient, The Bride Test. I don't know if you've heard of those. Great stories, and they really are about the sex in the book, but she makes it so that it is an important part of that book and why it's in there. And it's such a great, they're written so well, they're such great stories, but they're very romantic as well, so they definitely fall into the romance category.
Wendy, would you mind typing those into the chat?
Sure. Yep.
That'd be great. And you know, one thing I'm also thinking about in regard to sex and romance is like, how is the sex used in romance? Like, for example, I mentioned that I had done a lot of copy editing of the alpha male romances, and in those kind of romances, the sex is very much a expression of surrender on the part of the you know, the usually the woman character. I mean, now there's alpha male novels as well, but the use of sex kind of as a a plot driver, I guess, you know, to kind of change the relationship between the main characters rather than have that change come about through some other plot related way, struck me often in those novels as kind of clumsy, I have to say. It was hard, and I don't think that's, I think that is because the writers were kind of using it not up to its potential, but instead we're kind of trying to cut corners maybe a little bit in character development by just kind of throwing these characters together.
There is a good author who does that well. Her name is Kate Douglas. She writes the Wolf Tales.
Mm-hmm.
She does that very, very well. And that is a paranormal also, but she has a lot of explicit sex scenes, but they are used to drive the story and develop the characters and for major turning points and things in the story. Major plot points develop around some of the sex scenes. Not all of them, but some of them. And so I think she does that pretty well.
I think to your point, that in the alpha male type stories, what you're saying that has become almost kind of cliche now, where you
Right.
expect, if you're reading an alpha male story, you're expecting that it's going to be a lot of sex. It's going to be used as part of the plot to advance it, even though it's not really diving deep into the characters or giving your characters a great arc. It's just more the point where that's where you expect it to go.
Right. Well, what are the ways in which some of the romance that you all like to read or aspire to write, how is that romance breaking out of the forms of romance that we have all kind of inherited, or that the genre inherited? How are you breaking new ground, or how are those books breaking new ground, and what does that new ground look like? I'd be very interested. And if somebody who has been silent thus far would care to, I don't mean to say that I haven't, you know, I want to encourage everyone to speak, basically. And so if you have been silent, please feel free to speak up.
I don't know if it's exactly like breaking ground. There's I'm taking a shot, I guess, at a novel I'm trying to write. I haven't decided fully if it's going to fall under romance or if it's going to fall under some subgenre of it. But
And I'm sorry, let me just jump in. Is this the novel that you'd be working on for your thesis?
I haven't fully decided yet. I have two different
Okay.
ones I've been going on. I typically write paranormal, but this is kind of my first one branching away from paranormal. So it's, the main character I have is very independent, and she has a lot of characters I should say have like a really traumatic background. And so for her, I don't use sex in the sense of romance. I use it in the sense of like her escaping, if you will, because it's paired with so much trauma that it's like she disappears during the scene. So it doesn't key in a lot of details for that aspect. You more see her like disappear in her head.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to build a romance between her and like another character that is kind of breaking down those walls, but it's not going to end, I guess, like a typical romance in the sense that it'll be like a happily ever after, like he helps her cure everything. It's more like her helping herself through like the relationship she builds with him, but not necessarily like deciding that she needs him in order to be that like to have that strength that she finds at the end of it. But the romance aspect is a kind of a key factor of like helping her develop, but won't necessarily be like the end all be all.
Mm-hmm. So how would you see that marketed? I mean, where would you submit that, or how would you submit that in terms of like making the genre evident to an agent, for example?
Oh goodness. Right now, I guess
that will be an assignment. You'll have to do that at some point.
Right now, like the core content of it falls under, I guess, like a sports romance is where I would pull it from. Because she's breaking into an industry where she doesn't necessarily belong. And it's from like the trauma of it that she does break into it. So I don't know if I would necessarily I might market it more under like kind of torn on it, but kind of like I probably would market it towards sports romance. And I'd have to pull a lot more of the romance into like to make the development of it more prevalent in her character, I guess, so that you could see it plant in romance, but then have like it still be able to twist at the end. Haven't figured it out exactly.
I was gonna say that sounds a lot like something I'm doing with the sports romance. And
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Like I'm trying to figure out how to make it so that she's growing stronger, but not like all just because of the guy. But I also want it to be a romance, so it's kind of, I get where you're coming from. It's kind of tough.
But
Yeah.
the romance help in the character arc in the sense that it helps them self-discover, it helps them realize things about themselves and become more confident. So you can certainly use the romance in that aspect where it's not necessarily the guy that's saving her, but he's helping her see who she really is.
That's a good way of looking at it.
I want to tell you all about one that I read sort of accidentally last week because I'm not a romance writer, and that's not the genre that I seek out when I'm reading for pleasure. No offense to anybody, but I picked up this YA novel called Rosie Loves Jack. I'll put it in the chat, with Mel Darbin. And it's a book told from the perspective of a 16-and-a-half-year-old woman with Down syndrome who's in love with a young man, maybe he's 17, who has a traumatic brain injury and has, let's call them anger management issues. And he gets hauled off to an institution, and she defies her parents and her teachers and goes off through London to look for him. And it was such an unusual and refreshing take on romance novels.
I love that little synopsis. That's just beautiful. What a great. I hope somebody picks that up for a movie or something.
Oh, I'm sure they will. And it was intriguing to me because my younger brother has Down syndrome, and he had a longtime girlfriend for maybe 18 years before he declared her too boring and moved on to somebody else. But it's wonderful that this author dignifies this demographic of people, and it has a happy ever after ending. It was charming.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, Melissa, because I think that illustrates one of the things that I was getting at in my earlier question, which is like, what is the new ground that remains to be broken?
Yeah.
And, for so many years, and I think this is still, unfortunately, all too prevalent today, the idea that for example, people with Down syndrome are kind of non-sexualized, and their emotions are stunted at almost some kind of even pre-childhood level. They can't love in an adult way. And I think it's brave and to be applauded that Mr. Darbin decided to tackle that subject in a romance of all things, because that must have been somewhat controversial in certain quarters, I would imagine.
Oh, yes. Oh, most definitely. Somebody had mentioned Helen Huang a few minutes ago, and I had put a link way up early in the chat to an NPR interview with her this morning, and she talks about being a person on the autism spectrum.
All of the characters in those books are, not all of them, sorry, the protagonists are usually on the autism or on the spectrum.
I had no idea until I heard this.
That's what makes them so great, is the characters just draw you in because of their quirkiness, and they're different than what you normally expect in a romance novel. And it just draws you in from the very beginning, the way she writes.
Got it.
Okay, and I think I've even heard of ace characters in romances where there are, asexual characters. And I feel like that's, it's exciting to think about the ways in which a romance novel can by pulling on the kind of stereotypes and tropes that everyone associates with this genre, can really kind of do a little judo on those expectations, and yet still fulfill the basic bedrock requirements of the genre. I really admire that. I think that shows that there's real creative life in the romance genre.
My thesis novel is romance, speculative, suspense, and I wanted to make my protagonist deaf. And the only way she communicates is through sign language.
Wow.
Both of my children are hearing impaired, both verbal, so we don't have to worry about that. But I wanted to do something different with that. So it's been a challenge doing dialogue and interactions with other characters. I'm actually taking a sign language class so that I'm better able to describe how they act and how the hand motions go. And it's been a challenge, but it's been different, and I really am enjoying it because it's stepping outside of the box, like you said, as to what's normally expected in romance, and giving her a different personality with different strengths and weaknesses. So
that's awesome.
It's been fun. I like it.
Let me ask you this, just kind of a sideways step, but just as a technical matter, how do you convey the dialogue that's signed in the novel?
So everything that's in sign language is in italics.
Yep.
There's no quotation marks, so when it switches to italics, it's sign language. The challenge that I came across with that is there are flashbacks, and normally I would do my flashbacks in so that you're changing time.
Right.
What I've done with that then is in flashbacks it alternates. So all the flashback is in italics, and the dialogue in sign language would be in standard font.
That's a great solution.
Go back and forth. But yeah, I kind of toyed with that a little bit. How would you do the sign language? I didn't want to have to say every time somebody signed, and she signed this and he signed this. So just by switching it into italics, you get the idea that someone's actually speaking, but with their hands as opposed to their voice.
The other thing that occurs to me is that, sign language is it's a language. It's its own form of expression. So, and I don't mean to be putting you on the spot. I'm just super interested in technical questions like this. How do you convey so that the transcription that you're doing of the signing, how do you maintain the tone or the flavor of the signed language as opposed to just having it be human speech in italics?
A lot of signing that I'm learning through the class is facial expressions, body language, the speed in which you use your hands. So say in the dialogue, if the character is very anxious or nervous or even agitated, the hands are flying and the signs are coming out quickly and almost blending together. And it gets hard for people to read because they're going so quickly, or, the stance, they're very tight, they're very tense, their facial expressions really give away what they're feeling. Yep. So it's a lot of back and forth as far as, the dialogue, but then also describing how they're standing or what they're doing or how they're moving to portray the mood and the tone of the scene.
Good for you. I mean, when you tackle a book like that, you kind of have to level up in the writing of it. I mean, it kind of forces you to expand your skill set as a writer.
It's been a challenge, but I like it. Like I said, it's different. It's not your standard boy meets girl. Everything's great. There's a lot of challenges between the two of them. So we'll see how it comes out in the end. I'll let you know who my thesis professor is, and
maybe one of us will be your thesis professor.
Yeah, we'll see.
So we've got about 15 minutes to go, and I would just like to once again encourage anyone, if you have any questions or comments you care to make about the genre or indeed anything else, please feel free.
Okay, so there might be some awkwardness in my story because of location. My character is pretty much at the start. She's run away from home because some rumors have been going around about her. And the love interest is a guy that she barely noticed in high school because he was kind of dorky, but he's now like a hunk.
Mhm.
So, he he's making his way over to her workplace. Basically, he started learning how to ride horses when he found out that she was done with her ex, and he's kind of
So
making her
he's
way.
always carried a torch for her, it sounds like.
He's making his way to, her workplace, and which is in like Florida, and she's from South Carolina. So it's kind of like I'm trying to figure out how, because he's like traveling basically.
Hmm. Now, I imagine, this is another trope of romance fiction, the guy who is, or the love interest who is pursuing the protagonist. Um, Oftentimes that pursuit is either not welcome or is not taken seriously. Where do you draw the line with that kind of, because nowadays, if that kind of pursuit is apt to raise a lot of red flags, people are like, hey, that you're stalking,
Yeah.
your love interest is
Mhm.
stalking the protagonist, so why
Yeah.
should that be rewarded? So how do you avoid falling into that trap?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That is a
Yeah.
great question.
Because then it's like you're falling into the whole Twilight thing with, Edward being a stalker, and yeah,
I
that's
think
hard.
in those situations, it comes down to the emotions and how they're portrayed. I mean, if you have pure stalkerish instincts, like you said in Twilight, where it's kind of borderline creepy, but if you can describe the feelings and the mentality behind what they're doing and make their action genuine, I think it's certainly a fine line that you
Hmm.
on there, but I think it's possible to make it so that it's not creepy, maybe.
And I mean, the other thing, and I don't mean to constantly come back to my very limited experience in romance fiction, but alpha male romances are like really popular romances. They have a readership, and part of the readership is like successful women who are in control of their lives, and as a release, as a kind of a fantasy, as an escape, they like to read about situations in which uh, that are kind of the opposite of what their daily lives are. um, and I think that's important to um, understand or keep in mind, that if you kind of raise a red flag about some aspect of a novel, a romance novel, or any kind of novel, really, you might be stepping on somebody else's fantasy, and they completely understand that it is a fantasy. It's not that they're advocating this kind of behavior in the real world. They completely, it's understood that this is not a representation of real life as it should be. This is a fantasy that we are giving ourselves permission to indulge in.
That's a good point. I've been trying so hard to like make everything realistic, but I guess people do want to read for escape.
That's exactly it. I think people look for books that they know they can just read and not have to think about, and they can escape into a world and forget that they exist for a little bit. And that's what you have to write for. I think you need to write for who you want to read your stories, obviously. It's who you're going to market your book to. If you want it to be realistic and people to look at it almost factually, then you're writing to a different audience than those who just want to read a romance and disappear.
Right. I just recently finished watching and I've never read these books, but I just finished watching the season 1 of Reacher on Amazon Prime. I don't know if anybody here has read or seen that series, but Reacher is like this guy who's 6'4". He's built like like the Incredible Hulk. He is like got the brains of Sherlock Holmes. Um, women are falling all over him. He doesn't care. He's lives by a lonely code. He's like a paladin going off to right wrongs. And again in the series, which is like, a kind of a murder mystery, stuff happens where it's like, if you know anything at all about police procedure, you just have to go like, that's ridiculous. That would never possibly happen. But you put that aside, you suspend your disbelief, I guess. And it's very enjoyable for what it is, but nobody would ever mistake it for realism. I recommend that series, by the way. I really enjoyed it. It's called Reacher. Here, I'll put it in the I'll put it in the chat. Yeah, a not so guilty pleasure.
I think, though, to your point again, it's, when you read certain authors, you expect more realistic. Like if I read a Dan Brown novel, I know it's going to hold some pretty historically accurate facts in there and teach you a little bit about whatever he's writing about at that point. But when I read romance novels, I'm not looking for somebody who's going to teach me anything. I just want to read and have fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, could there be a realistic romance? Is that possible?
Sure, I think. I mean, again, it's all subjective, it's how you read it and what you take from it.
Right. I mean, we've certainly read about, some historical characters who seem to have had a very, whose lives seem to have fulfilled the expectations of a romance right down to the happy ever after. I guess a very famous one would be the Adamses, right? But I don't know. I'm not a historian. Maybe they just kind of massage the rough edges there to make it fulfill those expectations.
I have another question about, does everybody write in order, or do you kind of skip ahead, write a scene, kind of go all over the place? Like, how do you, when you're writing a novel, what's your strategy?
What do you do?
To be a pantser. And
You're a pantser?
Yeah, I write. I mean, I have done the whole plotting analysis, but obviously for classes we've had to write outlines and everything. But the way I prefer to write is just sit down and let it flow. I kind of have an idea as to what I want to happen, but it has to be in order. I don't think I'd be able to write a future scene and then go back and write something in the past, because I'm sure I would forget what I wrote and then it wouldn't make sense.
What do you do, Melissa?
Oh, I'm putting it in the chat. Okay, I swear this woman is not paying me, but we, in Thesis 1, 2, and 3, our textbook is Story Genius by Lisa Crone.
Love that book.
I love that book. I do not make a move on my fiction anymore.
Really?
Unless I have filled out my scene template.
Really?
Oh, they've saved my butt, and they've cut my revision time in half.
Yeah, that's huge.
And I outline now. Never used to.
Mm-hmm. So did that book teach you how to outline?
That book did not teach me how to outline, actually. I just, after you teach the thesis series enough and you're supposed to be looking at students' outlines, you finally just start outlining out of guilt, right?
I find that's 100% correct. With my most recent, usually when I sit down and write a novel, it just comes out, and I spend a lot of time in revision and I move stuff around. This time I was like, I've been teaching this stuff, for years now. I'm going to put into practice what I've been teaching others to do. And by the way, it's not like I teach that and say, like, you must do it this way. I try to say it's important, it's useful to learn these approaches to writing fiction. But this time I decided, you know what, I'm going to really hew to the line of what is taught. It was great.
Yep.
It saved me a lot of time.
Who knew?
I knew I feel like I had more of a sense of what I was doing in the moment than I've ever had with a novel.
How embarrassing. The other thing I do is something I learned at a writer's conference. I write a synopsis of the book before I begin, and then I write another synopsis, maybe a third of the way through,
Ah,
and then again 2/3 of the way through, and then at the end, because things are going to change.
right.
I have to say that outlining and scene templates do not cramp my style. That lovely surprise of your character doing something that you didn't expect them to do still happens.
Hmm.
And so I constantly readjust my synopsis to suit what the characters have done to surprise me.
So
And that
you find that your characters take you someplace different? Do you go back and change your outline, or do you
I
just go
do.
from there? You do.
Well, no, I don't change my outline. I change my synopsis. I can, I write the outline once. That's all I can ask of myself.
Yeah, and it can be a pretty tedious
You
and
can.
grueling experience. But that's great because then at the end of it, you've got a synopsis ready to go.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I just find it useful.
Well, everybody, we are reaching the end. I think we have time for one more question if anybody has anything.
About writing or publishing or the MFA program or anything. We're here for you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for attending tonight on oh, sorry, do you have one more?
I just thought of one.
Go ahead.
Well, right now I'm still early in the program. I'm in storytelling. I was wondering, where do I have to be in my thesis, like, you know, like throughout? I don't know how to ask this question. Like through the course, when should I have started it, I guess?
Hmm. I mean, you
Yeah.
can start at any time you feel like you know what you're going to be writing, but
Mhm.
the intention is that you would begin to work on it in the genre one course, which is 525, 526, 527, and I guess 524, and then continue working on it in the genre two course, and then focus on it in the three thesis courses. But as Melissa can testify, she'll back me up on this, I'm sure, that plenty of writers come into the thesis courses and that's where they start their novel because they've come to some understanding in working on it in genre one and genre two. They're like, you know
Yeah.
what, I'm not feeling it, or I came up with a better idea. So they start in MFA 700.
Yep.
So my advice to you is like, don't sweat it. Um, don't put any pressure on yourself. Do what you feel driven and inspired to do, and things will take shape almost of their own volition as you work your way through the course. That's been my experience.
I do find that my 700 students have a much easier time of it if they've already written, say, 3 or 4 chapters of
I
their
agree.
thesis novel. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you wait until MFA 700, you've got a harder road ahead of you because your thesis novel has to be a minimum length. It has to be
Right.
a completed novel, and if you're coming into MFA 700 with 15,000 words under your belt, that's very different than starting from scratch in MFA 700.
Right.
Do
Yeah.
you find that if you write more than what's expected going into 700, that a lot will change or have to change with that? That's my fear right now. So I have, a few chapters written and I'm coming up on starting 700 later this year. I'm just afraid that if I go too much further, I'm going to have to go back and change a lot.
Well, on the basis of the feedback that you receive from peers and instructor, I mean, I assume have you taken genre one or genre two yet?
I'm in genre 2 now. Yeah. So
So,
I have.
so you've already been receiving feedback from peers and instructor. I wouldn't anticipate that you would see a huge difference in that in the thesis courses. I think, I mean, the way that these courses, I know we're kind of running out of time, but the way these courses were originally designed, the thesis courses is like in thesis one, you continue the work that you were doing in genre one and genre two. In thesis two, thesis two, you basically finish the first draft of your novel. And then in thesis three, MFA 702, you're supposed to spend that time revising everything. Yeah. So if you come into MFA 700 with a good head of steam, with a lot of work already completed, I think you're more likely to to follow that intent and have one full semester to do whatever revisions you need to do
Yeah.
to complete a first draft that you're happy with, that your instructor is happy with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, now you'll all have to let me tell you something before we go, okay? It's Valentine's Day, and if that is not your
What?
jam, if you are not a fan, I need to tell you that the San Antonio Zoo will allow you to name a cockroach after your ex, and then you can watch on the live webcam as they feed the cockroach to a meerkat.
Oh my
Wow.
Here it is in the chat, just in case.
Melissa, you really know how to celebrate Valentine's Day.
I really do.
I'll
I
tell you
really
that. You're like the Scrooge of Valentine's Day. Everyone celebrates it in his own way, but
I'm just so tickled. I just
no,
love
it's
it.
great.
I feel like
It's
someone
great.
needs to write that into a romance novel.
Yeah.
They
But
do.
see, I'm the kind of person who's like, I feel bad for the cockroaches. I'm like, oh, they.
They're going to be eaten anyway. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah, very short lifespan.
Well, on that memorable note, I think we'll call an end to our chat. I'm going to stop the recording. And I want to thank everyone for coming again. We'll be back here next month, the second Monday of every month. Melissa and I host a chat. I don't know yet who will be joining us next time, but rest assured we'll have a fun, lively session planned for you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, Paul, do you want to stay just